So welcome everybody to the Southeast Speak, our second webinar in our series, our ongoing series of webinars during this crisis. I'm glad to see so many people logged on this morning. Some of you were at our first webinar a couple of weeks back where we looked at business modelling in a crisis and the need to reevaluate business models. Today it's all about cash flow management and funding during the crisis. Even during normal times, working with our clients, a lot of emphasis is placed on the importance of cash management, and I'm sure a lot of you who run your own business on the call this morning will know the importance of monitoring and managing your cash, and this is even more important now during this particular crisis. We had the central bank come out last week saying that SMEs will need the bones of 5.7 billion euros of emergency liquidity to survive this crisis, which is, it just beggars belief that the sums involved. So today is an opportune time to look at funding, and particularly cash flow management during the crisis in a very strategic kind of way. So we'll just have a look at our agenda. We promise to keep you no longer than 45-50 minutes, depending on the questions. So I'll have quick introductions and then just get a temperature reading from our guest speakers, Derek, Lowry and Niall McEvoy on the crisis and how it's affecting them, their clients. And Derek will have an overview of managing cash flow and funding assistance during the crisis. And then we'll have a discussion with Niall, who himself and his team are at the coalface in helping clients through this crisis, and to hear what various supports Enterprise Ireland are providing currently. During the webinar, we have a series of polls just to get you guys to participate, and we would also encourage you to type any questions you might have into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. We want to make this as interactive as possible, so if a question comes into your head, pop it in there and Rosemary can interject and ask the guys that question. Siobhan will be looking after the poll, so every so often you'll see a poll appear on screen, your answer to that as well. At the end as well, we'll give an outline of our upcoming webinars or seminars that's coming up in the next few weeks, and also a shout out, I suppose, to this evening, the NDRC at ARC Labs Accelerator, the Southeast based accelerator, are hosting an information session with Tau Glass, a Wexford-based company. We're ploughing on ahead with the next cohort of the accelerator here in the Southeast, so log on to ndrc.ie for further details on that. So just move on there, Rosie. So just a quick overview for those of you who are not familiar with Southeast BIC. We're part of a network of 4 BICs. We're a not-for-profit organisation working with innovative startups and SMEs in the Southeast region in particular. We received the majority of our funding from Enterprise Ireland to work with these innovative startups and work intensively with Enterprise Ireland and the local enterprise office and other stakeholders in the region. And how we do that with our clients, I suppose everything we do in the BIC with our clients is very much a one-to-one interaction geared towards investor readiness. So we get clients in at various stages, from concept to companies that are looking to expand and explore new opportunities. And how we interact is, as I said, an intensive one-to-one engagement. We do a lot of business modelling, financial modelling, investor readiness. We also manage the Halo Business Angel Network here in the Southeast as well. So we match companies with investors that are looking for opportunities. Rather than going on in too much detail about it, I would encourage you to go on to southeastbic.ie, have a look at what we do there, and get in touch with us if you have any questions on how we might help you through this crisis and beyond. So I'll just ask our guest speakers. We're delighted to have 2 guest speakers with us. We have Derek Lowry and we have Niall McEvoy. And guys, can I just ask you to give a 30-minute introduction? I don't want to do you any injustice by making the introduction myself. So if you can do a self-introduction, Derek, just 30 seconds on who you are and your background and what you do.
Perfect. Good morning, everybody. My name is Derek Lowry. I'm the principal of Almega Business Consulting. We work with SMEs across all of Ireland. Our three main services are debt advisory, outsourced HR, and corporate governance. I'm responsible for the delivery of the debt advisory and corporate governance divisions within the business. So effectively at the moment, we're busy working with customers trying to deal with the crisis, trying to figure out how to deal with the initial shock of being closed or have their trading significantly reduced. And now we've kind of moved into the more planning phase in looking forward as to how to deal with the reopening, what cash flow they might need, what supports they might need, and on working forward to do that. That's me.
Cool. Thanks, Derek. And Niall, over to yourself and just introduce yourself and what you do.
Yeah, good morning, folks. Niall McEvoy. I'm the manager of the high potential startup team on the ICT side in Enterprise Ireland. So all things tech, software, and working with companies from the very early pre-seed stage through seed and into follow-on Series A and seed extension funding. We obviously, most people will be familiar with EI in terms of our role in the ecosystem. So while I personally work on the HPSU side, Enterprise Ireland obviously is working with companies of all shades and sizes, urban and rural, regional and national, and we've come up with we're increasingly trying to respond to the current crisis by developing a range of instruments, a range of supports, products and services to help our client base through this particularly challenging time. So I'll do my best to cover off some of them in some detail today.
Great, thanks, Niall. And Niall, while I have you there, I suppose just before we go into the meat, and I know the meat of the webinar we'll discuss later in more detail, as you said, some of the supports, but just to get both yourself and Derek's, I suppose, feeling for how bad things are, I suppose, or what things are like out there as a result of the crisis. What are you seeing from an EI perspective, I suppose?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it'll be an understatement, I suppose, to probably try and even guess how bad it is, because the one thing we know is it is bad. We don't really know how bad it is yet. I was on a call yesterday where people were starting to say that we're starting to discuss the sentiment, how they feel the sentiment is changing in the last week, even that there's been a certain amount of, while everyone's been remote working and trying to get on top of the issues, but maybe the realization of the gravity of the challenges ahead are probably starting to really set home with companies right now. I mean, obviously we've seen a very significant impact, immediate impact on sales and on sales pipeline, and particularly on my side, on the startup side, where companies would have been projecting sales growth over the course of the year at a particular rate, where all of a sudden they're wondering whether they'll have any sales at all. For other companies, then they're impacted at varying ranges from 15% to 50% plus in terms of the likely impact on sales this year. That has huge implications on cash flow. It has huge implications on operations. It has huge implications on how they're going to structure their businesses going forward. When we look at the investment environment, investment, particularly venture investment, angel investment, high net worth, particularly early stage investment is drying up very, very quickly. I mean, there's no surprise there that people with free cash are now suddenly wondering, well, maybe it's not as free as I thought it was, and maybe I'm going to have to commit that to other things. We've seen issues on the manufacturing side in terms of supply chain, huge issues. We've seen issues in terms of people not, in terms of debtors and creditors, in terms of how people are managing that. So, how quickly can you get paid, and who amongst the people that you owe money to are the people who are really important that you absolutely have to manage them tightly, and who can you squeeze out? And I suppose the other thing we're seeing, and again probably more so on the startup side, but not exclusively, is one of the big challenges right now is going to be keeping the team together. How do you keep that team together? Because the people party, or the people are the people that are in your team, particularly the senior leadership team. They're the people that are going to help to drive to drag you out of this and hopefully sustain the business to the future. So where funding is very, very tight, how do you keep that team together? And it's something that we're very cognizant of particularly on the startup side.
Okay, great, Niall. Thank you very much for that. And Derek, just a view from yourself, I suppose more locally based here in the Southeast, what are you seeing amongst your clients and broader sectors around that?
Yeah, just following on, and we deal with customers across all sectors, but following on from what Niall was saying, I think firstly business owners are just trying to get over the shock. I mean, most people were trading away in February, looking at the full year, and all of a sudden they had to deal with, trying to maybe organize their team to work remotely, or, you know, in a lot of cases, there's been a lot of time and energy gone into where, unfortunately, employees have been laid off, and whether it's the temporary wage scheme or the pandemic payment, I would say a lot of our clients spent, you know, 4 weeks trying to get on top of that, what it meant, what the best option was. So it was really to deal with the initial shock of the very sudden change in circumstances and what that meant. I think now we're seeing that everyone is moving into the planning, the transition phase. Big concern about cash burn, and, you know, what it will mean, and also what will the reboot or the reopening stage mean, and how they manage that. We would deal with businesses, like obvious businesses in hospitality. Social distancing will have a real impact, and it's a question of whether they'll actually be able to open viably at all, and comply with social distancing. And really, I suppose markets are changing so fast, and, you know, this situation is changing so fast, and it's so unknown. In the last, say, week, we've been working with clients who thought they might be reopening next week. The conversations in the last day or two are changing to, well, that might be delayed a little bit longer. So it's really, I suppose, people trying to be as best prepared as they can, even in the uncertain times. But I definitely think people are very concerned. They're concerned of the depth of the potential global recession that people are talking about, and how their business can react to that. So even, like, if they go to reopen, you know, they may not be bringing all their employees back. It might be more phased, and it's just to think that through. So there's a lot of uncertainty out there. Obviously, there's been a very strong response from government initially. I think most people now are beginning to access those relevant supports, but there's also an eye on what more can be done, because, Aidan, I think you alluded to the fact the central bank estimates, you know, liquidity of up to 6 billion for the SME sector alone, to get it to trade. So people are looking at what more can be done and position themselves to try and take advantage of that. But again, everyone has been very innovative as well in terms to try and get back on trading and working through it and stay connected with all their employees and their key stakeholders, like their customers, etc. So that's what we've been seeing.
Yeah, and I think I'd echo that amongst our client base. What we're seeing is it's kind of a very proactive response to the whole thing. There, people are trying to say, well, okay, what can we do? Do we do things differently, or how do we adapt? But I think it's the word that was used by both of you guys. It's the uncertainty levels. Trying to plan in such a period of uncertainty where the horizon seems to be keep moving further and further away every time. So, like, even the May the 5th deadline that people had psychologically for next week, that seems to be disappearing again. So how do people deal with that from a business perspective? So thanks very much for that temperature reading, guys. That's very, very insightful. Derek, while you're setting up your presentation there, we'll have our first of our polls, Siobhan.
We do, yeah. So our first poll, it should be just launched on your screen there now. The question is, have you availed of any financial supports as a result of COVID-19? And it's a multiple choice, so you can pick as many answers of the supports that you've availed of. So we have Enterprise Ireland, the local enterprise office, bank funding, SBCI, MFI being Microfinance Ireland, funding from existing investors, your own funds, the wage subsidy scheme, or other. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to answer that, and we'll share the results at the end.
Great, thanks for that, Siobhan. And so, Derek, whenever you're ready, we can move on to your piece.
Brilliant. Okay. So effectively, I suppose we're going to talk about managing cash flow.
And before you start there, Derek, just to encourage people to, if you have any questions during this, to pop them in there to the Q&A box, and we're happy to take them. Thanks.
Absolutely, and just to echo Aidan's point, I suppose the more interactive the session is, the more beneficial it should be to all the participants. So happy to take the questions as they come through. I'm going to just talk about the key fundamentals of trying to manage a cash flow and what funding assistance is available during the time of crisis. First, we're just going to look at the scale of the crisis and what it means for Ireland and beyond. Then we're just going to go through the importance of knowing where your business was prior to the crisis, so having good understanding of how you were performing prior to the crisis. In terms of managing the cash flow, there's effectively three phases through this crisis. There's kind of the phase one, which was maybe your business had to close or trading is reduced. I think most businesses have gone through that phase, so we're just going to recap on that. The phase two is the now, what we're calling the transition phase. This is really around planning and looking at how you might be able to get elements of your business up and running during this current phase. Phase 3 is the returning to trade, or I've heard it described as the reboot phase. So again, look at how your cash flow management and funding systems will help there. And just to emphasize the point, as we discussed earlier, this is very fluid. So it's very important that everyone continuously reassesses their position. So if we just look at the current situation, we've heard commentary that it's an unprecedented situation. It's a once in 100-year event. It's a global crisis that's going to affect every country. From Ireland's point of view, back in February, we were projecting an exchequer surplus of 2.6 billion. Now that's expected to be a deficit of 23 billion. So that's a swing in exchequer funds of 25.6 billion. Also, GDP is forecast to drop by 10.5% in 2020. Currently, there's 865,000 people receiving income support from the government as a result of this crisis. The government expect 220,000 jobs to be permanently lost as a result of this crisis. So just to put that into context, the live register in February was 212,000. So within the space of 4 weeks, this crisis is expected to double the long-term unemployed in this country. And coming towards the end of April, there was over 1 million people dependent on the state for income. Unemployment is expected to peak at 22% in Q2 and decreasing only to 13.9% at the end of the year. And this is coming from a base of 4.5% before the crisis. One thing that struck me is the speed at which the crisis is moving and the changes to these numbers. When I was preparing these slides last week, I was using figures for the exchequer surplus and GDP that the central bank had prepared at the start of April. And as of last Wednesday, when Pascal Donoghue came out with the new figures, they were all redundant. So within the space of 2 weeks, the view has altered and changed. So again, it's to say to people, look, it is a significant event. There is an expectation that there will be a deep recession, but it's continuously changing and moving. And whatever plans you develop must be fluid. As a starting point, I think it's very important that you have a very clear understanding of your business prior to the crisis. This will be really important if you're going to look for help and supports during the crisis and over the next few weeks and months. Because if you're looking for funding support, people want to know, was the business viable? And they'll be looking at basing that on your trading prior to the crisis. So while it might be difficult to kind of focus on at the moment, I think it's important to complete your accounts for 2018, to complete accounts for January and February 2020. If you have a set of projections that you had prepared for 2020 prior to the crisis, use those. If you didn't, try and prepare a set as a kind of a base case. Know your key KPIs prior to the crisis, such as your sales growth percentage, gross margin, net margin, EBITDA, and any other KPIs that are relevant to your business. Then if we look at cash flow management during the crisis, we're going to go through the 3 phases. Phase 1 being what every business has experienced in the last 4 to 6 weeks, the immediate closure phase. Phase 2 being a transition phase, and phase 3 being the return to trading, the normal or the new normal as it's being called. So I think what's effectively happened over the last 4 to 5 weeks is businesses have been trying to deal with the closure of their business or the reduced trading, working remotely. So during this phase, it's important to protect your cash balances, reduce your cash burn, and to take action immediately. So my sense from working with all our clients is that there's been a lot of firefighting going on over that last 4 to 6 weeks as you go through it. So in terms of cash flow management, I've deliberately gone with outflows first. Because of the shock here, I think it's very important that people deal with their outflows. So we look at variable costs, that businesses make an effort to try and reduce their variable costs. The first element of that is wages, and people have been unfortunately either temporarily laying off staff who then can apply for the pandemic payment, or using the wage subsidy to keep their staff on the books. Other variable costs that you should assess and see can you get reductions on would be your standard light, heat, phone, travel. I think it's important that you manage your direct debits. So the view would be that you probably should cancel the direct debits, but talk to any suppliers before you do that and get your payment plan in place. But by cancelling them, you are in more control of what's going out of your bank account. Again, in terms of outflows, Move on then to your fixed costs. So rent, can you talk to your landlord about a deferral or reduction? Rates, there is 3-month deferrals available from your local authority up to the end of May. And the view is that an announcement will be coming in the next couple of weeks about a further update on this. Also insurance, there is discussions around rebates. So have a look at that and see is that applicable to you. Then moving on to your other cash outflows, such as loan repayments. The banks have been dealing with the requests for moratoriums. The response has been favourable, while there was a bit of a logjam at the start due to the sheer volume of requests. Most of the banks have worked through these requests now and have been forthcoming in supporting their clients in granting 3 or in some cases 6-month moratoriums. Also, there's some deferrals available from revenue, which should help with your cash flow as well. When you have all of this done, I think it's important that you log what savings you've made. Do a table. So if you've made savings around wages, rates, rent, that you can see that, look, I've made savings of up to 15,000 a month. This again is important if you're going to look for supports into the future, that you can demonstrate what action you've taken and what supports you've made during the phase 1. In terms of inflows then during phase 1, again, most businesses have been focused on, well, what revenues can I generate, whether it's online, whether it's pushing other products that are now in demand or looking at other markets. One of the really key points during this phase is your receivables. It's very important that you try and collect your debtors and get as much cash in as you possibly can during this phase. It will be difficult because everybody's trying to manage their cash reserves. Make sure you focus on collecting your money. Know what state supports are there to help your inflows during this period. You might also be able to access business interruption as part of your insurance policy. And again, there's working capital supports available from the pillar banks, be it temporary overdrafts or increased in other working capital facilities. And once you've worked through these items, make sure again you log what you've achieved, how you've increased your inflows, how you've moved it through. So you might have income coming through from the temporary wage scheme. You might have developed a new online sales stream and revenues. So log that in a table again so you can demonstrate what you've done in terms of inflows. Moving on to the second phase, which is where I think most businesses are at the moment, and what we're calling the transition phase. The biggest issue here is the length of time businesses will stay in this phase is uncertain. As we've said, people thought that maybe on Tuesday there might be some reopening. Now it seems that might be pushed out a little bit longer. The key steps for managing cash flow during this period again is prepare your cash flow for the period, continue to manage your cash balances and in particular your cash burn. Use this transition period as an opportunity to review your business, take an objective review of your business, prepare to access government supports, reassess your plan and stay connected to your key stakeholders such as your employees, your customers and your suppliers. So if you just look at some of those key steps in more detail, I've put inflows to the top this time. So really during this transition phase, you should be looking at maximizing your inflows. Are there elements of your business that can recommence trading? I think we've all seen businesses beginning to recommence certain elements of it. Have you products that you can sell to generate income, such as gift vouchers? Or can you trade in a different way? Can you move online if you're not already there? Or can you move more of your sales online if you already have an online presence? Can you operate a delivery service? Or can you do a contactless collection service? I think also we are encouraging businesses to work with their customers who have already maybe paid deposits and placed orders to defer their orders rather than cancel their orders, and also make sure that you continue to collect any outstanding receivables to maximize your inflows during this period. If we look at outflows then, again, revisit the cash burn. Is it more or less than you expected? If it's more, have you more scope to reduce outgoings further? Do you have sufficient cash reserves to trade through this period? And if you don't, have you applied for working capital to address the deficits? Again,
Derek, I have a couple of good questions that are relevant to the last bit, if you don't mind.
Yes.
One is, how long do you think the banks will stay understanding after this phase is over?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I think the banks are at the moment, they're actually looking forward themselves. The last 4 to 6 weeks they've spent reacting to the requests. but they're being quite pragmatic as well, in that when they see their moratoriums expiring in 3 or 6 months, or people might have got temporary overdrafts, they expect that they might be hardcore at the end, in another 3 or 6 months before the reboot phase really opens up. So they're looking at how they can help. I suppose, the forbearance is one element, and that will be done against, their whole compliance piece around central bank guidelines on bad debts and loan impairment books and watch books and things like that. So, and their capital base. So they will probably need to work really closely with government and central bank to continue forbearance. But there's definitely a willingness and a sense that everyone is in this together to work forward. But I think, there might be a new set of government supports that might take some of the pressure off debt instruments as well to help companies going forward.
Okay, and a good question, that not from the same person, but is a good follow-on, is what role do you think alternative funders have in supporting SMEs through the crisis and the reboot?
Yeah, I think, and to be fair, I think some of the alternative funders have come out quite strongly. New products have come from the likes of Bibby Financial Services and Linked Finance already, and the alternative funders that I've dealt with, they've been very supportive. Again, credit servicing firms have complied with the 3-month moratorium the same way the banks have as well. I think the alternative funders might see opportunities for innovative products to grow their market and to support SMEs in particular. So I would be expecting to see new products coming from them over the next couple of months as we move on through this process.
Okay, and I have one more question before I let you keep going, and that's you showed a 20% reduction on rent as an example. Would you say that's reasonable to look for from your landlord if all staff are now working from home, not using the office, etc.? Is this a little low?
Yeah, I think there's very mixed views about the responses of landlords. Some are supportive and some aren't. I really think, I use that as an example. I think each business needs to assess what's affordable for them. And I think if you go to the landlord with your plan and your cash flow and you're open and honest with them, I mean, the reality is, in most circumstances, if you move out of that building or are not trading anymore, it may take some time for a landlord to replace a tenant. So I would expect that most landlords will work, depending on the landlord's financial circumstances, but would work with their tenants. So it's really, 20%, you still mightn't be able to afford 20% for the next, an 80% payment of rent for the next 12 months, depending on where your business is going. If you can show your landlord your cash flow and are willing to share some, more financial information than you normally would with them, I would imagine they'd try and help and work with you.
Thanks for that. I'll let you keep moving. We've more questions, but we'll do
okay. Well, look, I'm going to go through the phase 2, and then maybe at the end of that, Rosemary, we can take the questions as we go through. So in terms of phase 2, then we're just talking about, this is the opportunity to take an objective review of your business. And we're encouraging businesses not to let this phase pass without taking that opportunity. I mean, will you reopen the same, or have you the opportunity to open, better, stronger? What are your opportunities, and where will your competitors be? So again, very simple strategic tools. Do a SWOT analysis, particularly around what were the strengths that got you through the crisis. Did you develop new strengths during the crisis? Did remote working, for example, work better than you thought? And can you build on this going forward? Again, what were your weaknesses during the crisis? What were the things you really struggled with in order to keep your business trading during the crisis? And can you change those going forward? Are there new opportunities opening up? Are there new markets, new products, new channels for you as a result of the crisis? What opportunities can you take? Will some of your competitors reopen? They mightn't be there. Again, what opportunities does that place for you? And again, what threats are there for you when you reopen? So have a good understanding of that. And just one other strategic tool I just want to reference is Porter's 5 Forces. This really looks at, again, in more detail around where your buyers will be, where your suppliers will be as well, and what opportunities you might have on both of those. Is there a threat of substitute products now coming in? Have your customers been accessing different types of products because of the crisis? And how do you react to that? Will new entrants come into your market in a different way, or will some of your competitors go? So this, again, just helps you try and get some sense of the landscape you're going to be facing after the crisis and when you reboot. And I think it's important businesses take the time to analyze where they're at and where they might be going forward. Again, just briefly, government supports at this phase, this is really around the planning phase. There's a number of supports to help you plan what you need to do going forward. So if I just look at the local enterprise office, they have their business continuity voucher. This allows you access consultancy services up to €2,500 to do a plan, to do cash flows, to access finance, to set up remote working policies, HR, ICT. So there's a broad range of supports you can access with this voucher. Also the trading online, helping you move online or develop online, and their ongoing training and mentoring. I know Niall is going to cover the EI supports in a little more detail after me, but again, there's an online scheme, there's a business financial planning grant up to €5,000, and there's a lean improvement grant if you needed to change your production processes around. There's support there to help you do that. Borbia brought out supports for their clients, and applications for those supports closed last week. Again, through phase 2, very important that you keep reassessing your plan. This is a very rapidly changing set of circumstances. So every week or two, we're advising people to have a look at the plan, reassess it. Don't be afraid to change what you're doing if it's not working. And I think, you know, there's a common message of staying connected. Very important to keep communication open with your key stakeholders, be it your employees, customers, suppliers, funders, landlords, etc. So make sure that you're conscious to stay connected all the time. Now, Rosemary, before we move on to phase 3, I'm happy to take if there's any other questions.
Yeah, just one question. Would it be reasonable for staff who work from home to expect to have their heat, light, broadband reimbursed by employers? That's an interesting one.
I suppose, again, a lot of companies at the moment are trying to put remote policies in place. Again, it moved so quick, everyone kind of jumped from the office to home probably within the space of a week. So I think for the employers there, I'd be saying be proactive, implement your policy, and then go to the employees. And it's based on what you can afford. What I see at the moment is a lot of people are still very glad to be in employment and receiving their wages, be it with the support of the temporary wage subsidy, or the employer topping up, or if they're working full time, the employer still being able to trade through it. But I think it's very important that a remote policy will be put in place to deal with those items.
Yeah, and the last question then: if your creditors don't reopen, how do you approach that unknown with the banks? If
your creditors don't reopen, well, I'm going to come to that in this slide about the legacy debt that you'll build up. So I'll cover that off as I talk through it. So if we look at the return to trading, or I think this has been described in some commentary as the reboot phase. Again, just to talk through the key steps there. Timing is uncertain, but I think as businesses, you have to be ready for when you may be able to reopen. Social distancing will become the new norm for the foreseeable future. So we'd advise people to have a good look at what impact that might have on your business. Obviously, for some businesses like hospitality, it has a more marked impact. But again, every business and every business owner will know what impact social distancing might have on their own business. Again, the key steps for your cash flow during this period is to prepare a cash flow for the reopening, run scenario analysis to deal with the potential changes during that period, know what relevant supports you can access, implement any changes that are relevant to your business as a result of your phase 2 review, and reassess your plan regularly. So just to look at preparing a cash flow, again, it's very important to continue to manage your outflows and your cash burn at all times during this period, and factor in the impact social distancing may have on your business into your cash flow. In terms of inflows, some elements of your business may not come back for some time, so you need to be realistic around that and the impact that will have. Again, make sure on your debtors and your receivables that you're collecting them in. Factor in if there's new opportunities in new markets, factor those into your inflows. I've moved up, obviously wages is an outflow, but I've put it in here because if you're gradually opening your business, you may need, if you're bringing staff back, you may need to phase bringing them back to match that outflow with your inflows. So just be conscious of that when you're looking at your plan to reboot and reopen. In terms of addressing outflows, it's very important to continue to manage your costs tightly. This feeds into the earlier question, Rosemary, the legacy debt. It's important that you have an understanding of what debt you've built up during the crisis. You may not have paid certain revenue outgoings. You might have got moratoriums off the bank. Your temporary overdraft may now be approaching hardcore, and you might need to look at terming that out. And you probably have had a build up of creditors. So factor that into your plan in terms of how you're going to deal with your legacy debt and communicate it. So to answer that person's question, if the creditor is closed, I'd still communicate how you intend to deal with their debt. Obviously, if you need their service and they're not open, you may need to look at accessing an alternative supplier for the time being until that supplier reopens as well, particularly if your business can open ahead of your suppliers. Businesses really need to be conscious of what extra costs are going to incur as a result of the pandemic. I don't think any business is going to be able to reopen without extra costs. So you need to be very conscious of this and look at what extra costs you might incur going forward and factor that in. In relation to your cash flow, clearly set out the assumptions you're using around your revenue, your cost of sales, and your overhead. Make sure you're preparing your cash flow in the context of what's going on in terms of the global recession and the potential impact that recession will have on Ireland and have on your business. So I just caution people not to be over optimistic. Challenge yourself on your projections and challenge yourself on being realistic. It's very important that you assess and understand what your break-even position will be when you reboot, and also how long it might take you to achieve this. In terms of your cash flows, I do think it's very important, and particularly if you're looking for supports, to run a number of scenarios. So even to start with, the worst case scenario, what your break-even scenario is, what your expected outcome is, and what your best case. But if you're going to seek supports, be it funding or whatever other supports you're going to seek, go on the basis of the worst case. I think it's very important that businesses just try and avoid going back to, say, funders or supports frequently if their plan keeps changing and if the outcome is worse than they thought. So start with the worst case, and hopefully, if it's better, then you mightn't have to draw as much funding, or you might be able to return back to a stronger balance sheet position quicker. So I do think it's important to start at the worst case. Just very briefly, looking at potential funding supports, we mentioned that the pillar banks, again, will be looking to support business through working capital and long-term loans. Again, though, I think the banks will be working within their own constraints, and repayment capacity and the ability of the business to return back to a viable level will be important there. Microfinance Ireland have a loan scheme of up to €50,000, and this is to support companies that maybe can't access funding from pillar banks, and that's a 3-year scheme. The SBCI is the main supports for funding that the government are using. They have three distinct products. They have the credit guarantee scheme, where effectively the SBCI guarantees your exposure to the bank up to a limit of 80% for loans of up to $1 million over a 7-year period. The COVID-19 working capital scheme is a reworking of the Brexit loan scheme. Just interesting to see an article in the Irish Times this morning where the take-up on this is quite low. 17 million has been approved to date on 100 applications. One of the reasons for that is because it's a rework of the Brexit loan scheme, there's some criteria around innovation that I think companies are struggling to meet to access this. So I'd expect further reworking on that fund to make sure the funds can flow to where it's needed. But just bear in mind, it's a 3-year fund, so the repayment terms on that could be quite heavy on your cash flow if you access it. And the last support from the SBCI is their future loan growth scheme, which is for longer loans, and they've added an additional 200 million into that scheme to help companies go forward. Enterprise Ireland have also introduced a new fund, Sustaining Enterprises. Now, this is a grant scheme. It's for viable but vulnerable businesses. It's for repayable advances up to €800,000 of over a 5-year period to pay that back if your project is successful. Again, as Rosemary, if there's any questions at the end of that, I'm happy to take them.
We're good for the minute now.
Okay. So just look, I suppose the key message is continue to reassess your position. There is significant support available, so just ask. I think it's important that you reach out and access the help that's available. We'd be encouraging companies not to wait. Some of our clients had reasonable cash reserves, and their view is, well, I'll wait till I run down my reserves a bit more, and then I'll ask. Wouldn't advise that. You know, really what you should be doing is accessing as many supports as you can to build up your position of strength in your business. I think if you're going looking for supports when you're beginning to run out of cash, that's going to put pressure on your business. That's not a good place to be looking for support in case it's delayed or you don't get as much as you can. Look at your cash position with a view to trying to maintain it at that current level for as long as you can by accessing all these supports. Also, access the supports now, and if other supports come out, you're then in a position to go and access those as well. And you know, all government agencies are encouraging businesses to reach out and access the support. So my advice would be, don't wait, just ask. Okay, that's all for me. Thank you.
Cool, Derek. Thank you so much for that. That was really, really insightful, and I'm sure we'll have some questions at the end for you. So I think, Rosemary, if you can put up the presentation now, we have another poll. Poll 2 of 3. So, Siobhan, you can take us through that.
We're going to go through poll 2 now, so it should be up on your screen. So I suppose, as Derek is saying, we're currently in the transition stage and we're working towards the recovery stage, or to go back to trading. So we're just wondering, how long do you estimate it will take your business to get back to pre-COVID-19 trading levels? And if you just want to tick the box there.
Cool. So while people are ticking that, Siobhan, we can get started with Niall. You've been waiting patiently there, Niall. I think, Rosemary, we have just a question there from Niall, just to pick up on one of your opening statements, Niall, just as a kick-off. Are you there with Niall?
Is Niall there?
Is Niall with us?
I am. Apologies. You think you
cool.
think you'd get used to it at this stage, but you still do.
You're grand. I suppose now, before we just go in, we have a question there. Somebody asked a question at the kickoff, and we're waiting patiently, I suppose. Said, Niall, be careful what you say as well. Niall, you said that investment is drying up. Would you see any opportunities, I suppose, any sectors, I presume they mean, for investment opportunities? I think that's what they mean by that. Any sectors maybe that there might be?
Yeah, there are. I mean, you know, I mean, for example, some online sectors are having are seeing a very strong upturn in business. On the med tech and the life sciences side, we've seen some of those businesses. On the ICT side, we've seen some of the digital health type businesses maybe are not being impacted as much. Any businesses that where their business model is strongly linked to delivering the solution remotely, potentially is seeing a lesser impact. But I mean, I think I'd have to say that 95% of clients in our portfolio are on the other side of the seesaw here. And are facing into all the challenges that, Derek, because it's not just about your own businesses, it's about your customers' businesses. And while your business you may feel that your solution and your offering actually is something that's, you know, can help to strengthen businesses at this point in time. Fundamentally, you're looking at your customers and you're looking at your people. You're looking at their businesses and you're saying, well, if their businesses are starting to go through very, very rocky times, they're going to be doing all the things that Derek has just spoken about in terms of battening down the hatches. And it might not be until that they're in the middle phase where they're starting to look at business model innovation and process innovation, where some of the stuff that these businesses might have to offer can be brought to bear. On the investment side, in general sense, whether it's, I mean, I think a lot of the venture funds that were looking at deal flow for themselves are suddenly faced with the prospect whereby their existing portfolio of maybe 20 or 30 investees are suddenly going to have their hands out for a check far quicker than than they would have been expecting. I mean, a venture fund will always reserve money for follow-on investments in companies, but all of a sudden that whole thing has shifted forward. So where they might have been expecting to write term sheets for 8 to 10 new deals this year, all of a sudden they're looking at their fund and they're sort of saying, well, at least half of that money or more may have to go into deciding which one of the existing ones we keep alive. I mean, it will be as stark as that. And for high net worths, Aidan, you mentioned obviously you look after the Halo Business Angel Network in the Southeast, and we would already see that business angels, high net worths are getting increasingly jumpy about early stage deals, because the getting early stage is risky enough, but getting involved in early stage investment, maybe when your own net wealth has suddenly rapidly eroded and where you might want to have a higher proportion of your wealth retained in cash. I think that's perfectly understandable.
Yeah.
But,
and it's amazing to watch. It's amazing how that has evolved, as Derek mentioned, over a period of weeks. Like initially it was, oh no, we're open to opportunities, we'll have a look at what's happening. But as time has gone on, people are getting a little bit more, we'll have to see. And we're closing a few deals maybe that were already in negotiation, and we're seeing those still live. But as I said, deals might take longer to close, or amounts might be smaller. Valuations are definitely going southwards a little bit as well. So yeah, it's an ongoing monitoring situation as regards HBAN and business angels from our side, I think.
Yeah.
If we could touch now, I suppose, like everybody else in this situation, big, small, public, private, everybody suddenly was hit with this crisis, this bolt from the blue, and Enterprise Ireland, like anybody else, had to look inwards for a little while and say, okay, what supports we can do. So can you take us through that journey, and what supports, where AI came about, the supports they have maybe, and the approach they've taken in the last number of weeks and maybe going forward?
Sure, no problem at all, Aidan. So I'll quickly run through. I haven't stepped this out in a slide deck, but look, I mean, most of this information is available on our website, and
we can send it on to people. We can send it on afterwards to people.
Or through a company's development advisor if they're already an EI client. So I'm just going to quickly step through some of the supports that we've come up with. So the first thing to say, and this is particularly relevant to what Derek's been talking about there, we are offering a business financial planning grant. Okay, and that is a 5K 100% grant, and it is to help companies to create a financial plan to secure their external financing they require, but also create the financial plan to provide a framework for them to manage the finances of the business. So a lot of what Derek was talking about there, we're actually providing a 5K grant to get in a strategic financial planning consultant, and there's a large database of people that we've approved for this, to deliver this. It's well over 100 providers, and I would encourage any company that is eligible to apply for that. And in terms of eligibility, that's open to all manufacturing and internationally traded services companies. I would encourage people to look at that, because while your gut instinct might be, well, I have a very deep understanding of the financial planning process, and lots of companies do, but lots of companies don't. And where you can get somebody in expert who can challenge, but who can run the scenarios, who can do the scenario planning, who can work out, who can help you to prepare your information in a meaningful way for the people that you're going to be engaging with as part of this. So who can help to prepare you to best position yourself with the banks, best position yourself with Enterprise Ireland, and best position yourself with external funders. So that's 5K 100%. We're also doing a lean business continuity voucher. That's 2.5K. Again, it's 100% grant, and this is focused on helping companies with their business process re-engineering, with planning operations for the recovery, with remote working processes that they need to be put in place for the long term. And again, there's a panel of experts there that can help you guys, can help companies avail of the best in class in terms of consultancies and brains that can help in those specific areas. I want to just move on to the Sustaining Enterprise Fund. Derek mentioned it there. But this is a fund that is open to manufacturing internationally traded services companies employing 10 or more people in Ireland who've been impacted by a 15% or more reduction in turnover or profit. And I think, look, an awful lot of companies fall in. I mean, the bulk of companies will have little difficulty demonstrating a 15% impact in turnover or profit. It's open to Enterprise Ireland clients, UDROS clients, IDA clients, local enterprise office clients, and in fact non-EI clients, so long as they're manufacturing and internationally traded services companies. Important to note that there is an ineligibility piece on this. This is supported under the EU temporary aid framework. And undertakings that were deemed to be in financial difficulty at the 31st of December 2019 will not be eligible. And there are some there's specific balance sheet rules and that. So if your balance sheet is weakened by heavy sustained losses over a long period of time, you may well fail those tests. So it's important to look at the specifics on that. And again, the details are all there and published on our website. Just to quickly run through that, funding is in the form of a repayable advance against a sustaining enterprise project plan. Repayable advance will be new to some people. It's sort of it's not a grant and it's not a loan. It sort of sits in between. But it's an instrument that we deem that is most appropriate to provide the maximum benefit to our clients at this point in time. There's a 100K, the range is 100K up to 800K per undertaking. Funding is tranched in one or more installments. Repayment commences at the end of year 3 and is completed by the end of year 5. So nothing until 36 months have passed needs to start heading back in terms of repayment. There's an annual administration fee of 4%, which is payable after the end of year 3. So again, nothing near term. And really importantly, funding here should form part of a tripartite agreement between EI, the banks and the promoters and our investors. This isn't a product that is going to suit where, you know, someone will come and say, well, Enterprise Ireland is the only organization that's going to write a check here. And this links back to the 5K offer I spoke about earlier. If a company believes it can be eligible to get support under the Sustaining Enterprise Fund, using that 5K to get your finances into really, really good shape so that you can deal with EI, deal with the banks, deal with other funding sources to help create this three-legged stool where everybody's playing a part. I think that's that's very beneficial indeed. It's worth saying we are also looking at new products all the time in terms of under sustaining enterprise, and I believe there's to be an announcement before the end of the week on an additional product under this broad category at the less than 100K range. So just keep an eye out for that. It's not officially announced yet, so I can't say it, but there will be further products from Enterprise Ireland under sustaining enterprise coming forward this week. If I can briefly maybe just touch on the HPSU side, because a lot of early stage startups and with the work that the BICs do has a strong focus on the startup side. So just to talk about what we're doing on the HPSU side, because a lot of HPSUs won't have 10 staff, so therefore they won't be eligible for the Sustaining Enterprise Fund, the main 100K to 800K offer. We have launched a scheme under HPSU, which is enabling us to take a much more flexible approach to follow-on funding into our existing HPSU investees. So, you know, we would have an active portfolio of many hundreds of existing high potential startups that have been funded at seed stage. So a seed funding stage, typically those rounds 500K up to $1 million, and the companies that have been funded over the last 5 years. And our approach to follow-on funding historically might have been more in that regard would be that those companies that are on a really, really, really high growth trajectory are the ones that we tend to get more actively involved from a follow-on perspective. We recognize that in the current environment, lots of companies that were making progress, that were making decent commercial and technical progress, are suddenly faced with a scenario where their funding runway is going to be substantially shorter than they would have planned for. So for companies that we can see where they've got less than 6 months funding, and realistically less than 6 months funding honing into view right now, we are looking at a range of follow-on funding support. So again, previously we would have been looking at follow-on, where you're looking at follow-on rounds well north of 500K. We are now prepared to look at that in the context of, look, some companies just need to be able to put in place enough fuel that they can get themselves meaningfully towards the end of this year, where they might be able to trade out of this. So we've reduced the quantum on our follow-on funding, and we're taking a more pragmatic approach to follow-on funding, in terms of we need to try and sustain those businesses that were making progress and that were clearly progressing as per their original business plan. It's probably important that I would say on that if a company wasn't making progress, and a company's heading into that sort of 3-4 month running out of cash anyway, because they had no sales or very, very limited sales, and they had failed to attain product market fit and get customer traction. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden that just because of COVID that there's going to be one for everyone in the audience. There isn't. But look, for a lot of companies that were making progress, we're very much open for business on follow-on funding. Again, if we're going to write a much smaller check and follow on just as a sustaining check for HPSUs, for example, if we were going to write a 50K check, we would be looking for other investors to come to the table with 50K. But we can do this quite quickly, and everything will be looked at on a case-by-case basis. And I would say that the most important thing is there for companies that are in that HPSU category to talk to your development advisor. And look, in any category of these supports, the most important thing is to talk to your development advisor. Just one other scheme which I just very briefly bring your attention to, if I can, is our online retail our online retail scheme under Sustaining Enterprise Fund. We are looking at a total fund of 2 million to fund up to 60 companies, up to a maximum of 40,000 each via a competitive call. This is this is outside of I suppose the normal bread and butter stuff for EI, and that this is to help Irish owned retailers employing more than 10 full-time staff to generate an online presence. They would be traditionally in the bricks and mortar type retail space, but they must have a retail outlet and derive the majority of the revenue from that retail outlet. Projects should show ambition to export in the future, and there's a minimum expenditure there of 12,500, of which 10,000 is grant. So so again, companies that are making their money traditionally out of the high street or out of bricks and mortar outlets, and who have an ability to move online, there is a product there for them. So look, I'm conscious of time, Aidan. Maybe I'll just
that's brilliant, Niall. You've given a great overview there, and I think in tallying in with the team of our webinar this morning, I think that 5K financial planning support is very important. That this is the time, I think both Derek and yourself, the importance of the financial planning aspects of what you're doing, and to nail down exactly where you currently are and where the journey is over the next 3, 6, 12 months or whatever. That's vitally important. What I might suggest is that I see there's questions popping in there. We'll take the final poll question, and then we'll go into the Q&A with both Derek and yourself. I see there's questions there for both of you. So Siobhan, can we just take the last
perfect.
poll?
We're just going to launch it now. So we heard, I suppose, Derek and Niall both saying about you want to best position your company. Have you reworked your business plan and cash flow projections in light of the COVID-19 crisis? If you just want to give a quick answer there.
Yeah, brilliant. So Rosemary, I see there's some questions there. Do you want to lead some of the questions for the guys there?
There's loads of questions actually. I have one question. There's a lot of support for existing trading companies, but not as much for startups that may be pre-revenue and still in development mode. I suppose a lot of our clients would fit into this category, Niall, particularly. So what's the plan to support that pre-HPSU, or is there a plan to support that pre-HPSU sector?
Yeah, well, look, we are looking at the supports across the board here, and as I say, we're rolling out stuff all the time. The one thing I would say about the pre-seed, the pre-HPSU sector is that, firstly, they're probably pretty lean anyway in terms of they haven't raised money, so that part of the journey hasn't changed for them. They would have had to remain lean anyway up until the point they got funded. But clearly we recognize that the funding piece is moving out. I mean, we've just closed a CSF call, okay? And we will be opening another CSF call imminently. So CSF is still there and still available. And the one thing I'm in talking about any of the current emergency responses is to not lose sight of the fact that there's a range of the same range of supports in terms of feasibility study supports, in terms of CSF supports, are all available to existing pre-seed stage companies. So to apply for those supports as you would normally, and we are keeping a close eye to see whether and what we need to come to the market with in terms of that stage. But we believe at this stage that the existing Enterprise Ireland offer covers off that particular sector adequately.
And also, I suppose, to reference the local enterprise offices who are
absolutely, the local enterprise offices have a huge role to play here. EI is a little bit further stepped on in terms of the company journey, but pre-EI, the local enterprise offices offer fantastic support.
Another question: can you apply for the 5K grant and the Leo continuity voucher? Because normally you can be only a client of one or other.
That's a great question. You've got me there.
My understanding is you can only be a client of one or the other. I don't think that rule has changed.
I know, but the 5K grant is available to non-EI clients.
Yes, it is. It's available to Leo clients as well. So,
yeah.
You can't be double funded for the same thing. That would be so. If they're separate, if they're separate initiatives, but you can't be double funded. You can't claim it twice for the same initiative.
Okay, no worries. Somebody else is saying, and can we see grants coming down the line instead of putting more debt on SMEs that have been forced to cease trading?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I think the view is that there has to be more supports at the moment. The current suite of supports are definitely more debt focused. And again, if you look at where the government is coming from and the central bank saying that SMEs could need up to 6 billion, that can't all be debt. So there will have to be other supports. I don't think they're there yet in figuring out how to get that support. I think there's a willingness to do that. And, commentary at the moment is about other models in the UK and Germany, and, the government may choose to use some of those as well to help. But I definitely think there will be more to come, because there'll have to be, given the scale of the crisis and the level of supports businesses will need.
Yeah, and just to come in on that point, I mean, we're sort of we're talking about the three phases. Derek talked about 3 phases. We're broadly in the same space, slightly different terminology. But what we're talking about here is phase 1 is stabilize, phase 2 is reset, and phase 3 is recover. And I think when we get into the reset and the recover phase, I think we will be certainly looking to make sure that a lot of the grant supports that are available through Enterprise Ireland, like which by the way are all still available, where like key manager hires, like market discovery fund, like capability development, R&D grants, okay, all those things which are currently available. But we would see in the current environment, they almost sit more in the reset recover stage because of the crisis, the requirement for crisis management. But we will definitely be looking at how we expand our activity in the with those products which are grant funded. But I think, as Derek says, I think there's probably a bigger picture thing here as well, and just the sheer scale of this in terms of how public money, how government money and government leveraged money, what that's structured like going forward.
Okay, I think all the rest of the questions here we've kind of either covered in the other answers, or they've been covered by some of the other questions.
Yeah, I'm just conscious of time, Rosemary, as well. And sure, look, if anybody has any burning questions after this, forward them on to us, and we can get them on to Niall and to Derek as well. So we're open to that as well, so no problem. So look, I suppose just to move on to the slide there, just as a kind of to finish up. I'm conscious that we've gone over the hour. We've broken our promise. Siobhan, do you have a couple of seconds there on the polls?
We do, yeah. I'll just give a brief overview of them. So the first one, the results were really interesting, and we're seeing 44% have availed of the wage subsidy scheme. I suppose that's what we're seeing in the market as it is. But 28% have availed of the Leo, and 24% have availed of no supports. So it'll be interesting to see after today's webinar when you start to avail them going forward. The next one, I should be able to share this one on the screen. So the next one is was in relation to how long do you estimate that it'll take your business to get back to pre-COVID-19 trading levels? And we're seeing the majority of people are saying between 6 months and 12 months. So that's a very good result there. And then the last one was on the business planning. So if you can see those results there, we have, yes, 57% of people have re-looked at their business plan and cash flow. 25% of people plan to do so after today's webinar. So that's a great result.
Brilliant. Thanks, Siobhan. So just look, first of all, I'd just like to thank Derek and Niall for your time. We know that you're both very, very busy, but I found it really, really educational and insightful listening to you both this morning. So thank you so much for giving your time to us today. I'd like to thank everybody who logged on this morning. Again, we know that people are busy, but we hope you found it very, very useful. I'd like to send out a big thanks to the team here in the BIC, to Rosemary, Siobhan, Carol, and Denise for putting all this together. Our next webinar schedule, the next in our webinar schedule is the 13th of May. We have Brendan O'Hara of Untapped, who's been a remote worker for a long time, and he's going to talk us through remote and flexible working from a well-being and a kind of how to look after yourself rather than the tools. You go through that as well, but mainly on the looking after yourself from that perspective. And then on the 27th of May, we've a cultural webinar with Sharon Demel of the Intercultural Coach. And just a shout out that this afternoon at 5 p.m. The Southeast Accelerator NDRC at Arc Labs was recently launched, and there's a seminar there with Dermot O'Shea of Tau Glass based down in Wexford, clients as well. So that they give information about their business and also information about the upcoming accelerator here in the Southeast. So with that, as I said, apologies for going over the time, but it was really, really interesting in terms of the questions. Derek and Niall, thank you so much for coming on board this morning. We'll talk to you again soon, and thanks to everybody else for logging on this morning, and we'll talk to you very, very soon. Thank you very much indeed.